The rain came late that spring, drenching the rolling farmlands of Lancaster County in silence and mud. To outsiders, it was a peaceful world, a place where time stood still, and where every barn, every prayer, and every rule existed to keep sin away. But within one small Amish settlement, a story began to spread in whispers, of a woman who had helped bring countless lives into the world, until one night, she helped deliver a child that was never meant to exist. Her name was Ruth Stoltzfus. A midwife. A healer. A devout woman of faith. And after that forbidden birth, she vanished without a trace. 3 days later, her bonnet was found by the riverbank, still tied, as if someone had placed it there with care. This is not just a story about what happened to Ruth. It's a story about the things this community buried, and the one secret that refused to stay underground. If stories of faith, silence, and secrets hidden in plain sight intrigue you, subscribe and stay until the end, because this case will take you deep inside a world where purity was sacred, and where one forbidden child may have cost a woman her soul. Chapter 1: The Bonnet by the River. The morning mist clung to the valley like a veil. A pair of boys, brothers from the Stoltzfus farmstead, followed the creek downstream looking for driftwood when one of them noticed something pale tangled in the reeds. At first, he thought it was a bird, a heron, maybe, caught in the current. But when he reached down, his fingers touched the edge of damp cotton, stitched neatly by hand. It was a woman's bonnet. White, clean even under the mud. And on the inside, in faint blue thread, the initials RS. They ran back home without speaking. In their world, a bonnet lying by the river could only mean one thing: shame or death. When the elders gathered by the bank later that morning, they stood in silence. The bishop, Abraham Fisher, turned the bonnet over in his hands. His lips moved, but no words came. The men behind him, farmers, carpenters, fathers, shifted uneasily. They all knew whose bonnet it was. Ruth Stoltzfus had been missing for 3 nights. Her lantern had been found still burning in her kitchen. Her bed unslept. Her horse untouched in the barn. "Let no word of this leave our community," Fisher finally said. "Not until we know God's will in the matter." The decision was final. They buried the bonnet beneath a maple tree, as if hiding it would hide the sin. Ruth had lived on the edge of the district, in a small white house lined with drying herbs and jars of salves. Everyone trusted her. She had delivered nearly every child born in the settlement for 20 years. Some said she had a gift, hands so gentle that even the stillborns seemed to breathe when she touched them. But lately, things had changed. She had begun to question certain rules: why women could not speak in meeting, why some births were hidden from the records. And then, in early May, a rumor began to circulate, of a girl from the next farm, barely 17, unmarried, whose belly had begun to show. When Ruth visited her, neighbors whispered that she had been led astray by the world. Others whispered that the father was someone respected, someone married. That night, the lamps in Ruth's house burned late. And the next morning, she was gone. The bishop ordered a prayer vigil. "We must not invite the eyes of the English," he warned. "They will twist our sorrow into spectacle." So they searched quietly, through barns, fields, even under haylofts, never crossing the fence line into town. But they found nothing. Only that single bonnet, washed clean by the rain. Inside Ruth's house, the elders found her Bible open on the table. The verse was underlined in pencil. "For there is nothing covered, that shall not be revealed, neither hid, that shall not be known." Luke 12 verse 2. 3 miles away, at the edge of the forest, a stranger was seen that same night. A young man in plain clothes but without a beard, an outsider. Some said he came asking for Ruth, others that he carried a newborn wrapped in a quilt. But no one admitted to speaking to him. By dawn, the man was gone too. When the constable finally came, summoned in secret by Ruth's cousin, the community refused to open their doors. "We handle our own," the bishop said. And so the file remained thin: a single bonnet, a missing midwife, and a silence thick enough to bury a life. But that silence would not hold. Because 6 months later, after the first snow, a hunter found something strange buried beneath the frozen soil near the Stoltzfus orchard, a cradle, small and empty, its lid nailed shut from the inside. Chapter 2, The Child That Shouldn't Have Been. The first one to speak of the child was Miriam Zook, the baker's wife, a woman who always seemed to know what others were afraid to say. She swore she'd seen Ruth walking toward the Miller farm 2 nights before the disappearance, carrying a satchel of linens and candles. Miriam had been on her porch at the time, cooling loaves in the night air, when Ruth stopped at the gate and asked for extra flour. She had smiled, but her eyes were strange, focused on something far beyond the horizon. She looked like someone who had already said goodbye, Miriam said quietly. When she didn't return by morning, the settlement assumed she'd gone to tend a difficult birth. It was common for her to stay overnight with young mothers. But by the second day, word spread that no one had seen her, not even the family she was supposedly helping. And then the bonnet surfaced. Behind the facades of peace and prayer, the Amish of Lancaster County carried 1,000 small secrets: births before marriage, cousins too close in blood, affections that had to be strangled in silence. Ruth knew all of them. She had delivered the evidence of sin with her own hands, wiped the blood, and buried the shame under clean linen and scripture. But the rumor about the forbidden birth was different. It didn't just challenge the ordnung, it threatened to expose the fragile line between obedience and hypocrisy. The mother, they said, was Anna Lapp, the daughter of one of the wealthiest farmers in the district. She had vanished for a week under the pretext of visiting an aunt in another county. When she returned, she looked thinner, her face pale as flour. Ruth visited her twice after that, the only visitor allowed by the family. What was born in that house, no one knew for certain. But the cries of a newborn were heard that night, echoing faintly through the open barn doors. And by dawn, the sound was gone. In her home, Ruth kept a journal, a simple notebook bound in faded blue cloth. It wasn't common for Amish women to write personal thoughts, but she often recorded her medical work, recipes for herbal tinctures, and Bible verses that guided her care. The bishop's wife found it during the first search but handed it over quietly, saying nothing about its contents. Weeks later, when a cousin secretly showed it to a schoolteacher in town, a few lines written in Ruth's small, careful script chilled her to the bone. A child born without blessing will not live long among the righteous. I pray that mercy outweighs obedience. As summer deepened, strange things began to happen. Chickens were found dead, their necks neatly twisted. A Bible left on the altar was discovered torn, as if clawed by an animal. The men took it as a sign, God's anger over the sin they had hidden. The bishop announced a day of repentance. Everyone was to fast and confess privately before the elders. Yet even then, the word murder was never spoken aloud. Only one man, Eli Yoder, dared to suggest the truth. Eli was Ruth's cousin and a widower who had once courted her before she devoted her life to midwifery. He stood up during the meeting, his hands trembling. What if she didn't leave, he said. What if someone made her disappear? The room went still. Fisher's gaze hardened. You will not speak that way again, he warned. Evil listens when you name it. A few nights later, Eli's barn burned to the ground. The fire began without warning, in a locked stall, and by the time the neighbors arrived, the building was a skeleton of smoke and ash. Inside, they found no animals, no tools, nothing but the faint smell of oil. Eli stood in the yard, staring into the embers. She was right, he whispered to a neighbor. Something unholy walks among us. Meanwhile, across the field from Ruth's empty house, the Lapp family grew more withdrawn. Anna was no longer seen in the fields or at Sunday service. Her mother claimed she was ill with a woman's fever, though everyone knew what that meant. But one evening, as the sun set behind the silos, a young boy delivering milk heard something through their open window, a lullaby, sung so softly it barely carried on the wind. When he told his mother, she slapped him for lying. Yet he insisted, it was a baby crying, then him. By August, the crops began to fail. The corn withered early, cows birthed stillborn calves. The people whispered that Ruth's disappearance had brought a curse. Some began to leave offerings by the river, ribbons, bread, even a pair of handmade booties. They hoped to appease whatever spirit now haunted their valley. Then, one morning, the river ran red with clay and something darker. When the current slowed near the bend, a small wooden cross surfaced, carved crudely from oak. On it, in the same handwriting as Ruth's journal, was a single word: forgive. The bishop ordered the cross burned, calling it blasphemy. But Eli kept one fragment, a sliver of wood small enough to hide in his coat. That night, as he turned it over in his hands, he noticed faint streaks on the back, fingerprints, small and delicate, pressed into the grain while the varnish was still wet. They looked like Ruth's. The next morning, he went to her house again. Dust had settled thick on everything, and the air smelled of lavender and mold. On the kitchen table, a candle had burned itself down to nothing. Beneath the tablecloth, he found something wedged into the wood, a mark carved deep, hidden under the fabric's edge. It was a date, May 14, 1991. The night she vanished. And below it, a single word carved in the same trembling hand: witness. Chapter 3, The Night of the Forbidden Birth. For weeks after finding the carved word witness, Eli couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the candlelight flicker across Ruth's kitchen table, the mark in the wood, the trembling strokes of her knife, the final message she'd left behind. He knew what it meant. Ruth had seen something that night. Something she wasn't meant to see. He started to retrace her steps in secret. He walked to every house she'd visited in the weeks before she vanished, under the guise of trading milk or tools. Each family greeted him politely, but there was a shadow in their eyes when he mentioned Ruth's name. In the Amish world, silence wasn't just a choice, it was a weapon. Still, pieces began to form, small, quiet truths whispered by those who could no longer carry them. Anilap's younger sister, Rebecca, was the first to break. She met Eli in the woods at dusk, her hands trembling inside her apron. "She didn't die, Eli," she said in a whisper. "The baby didn't die either." Eli felt the ground shift beneath him. "Then where?" Rebecca shook her head. "They sent them away. Both of them." He wanted to press her for more, but she stepped back, eyes wide with terror. "Please, don't ask me again. They said if I speak, the elders will cast us out." Then she ran toward the fields, her bonnet ribbons flying like wings behind her. That night, Eli rode to the Lapp farm. The lanterns were dark, but a faint glow came from the barn. He dismounted quietly and slipped through the side door. Inside, he found Anna kneeling by a cradle, humming a hymn under her breath. The baby's small hand reached toward the light. When she saw Eli, her face went white. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I came to ask what happened to Ruth." Anna looked down at the child. "She helped me," she said. "She helped him live. But that was her sin." "Her sin?" "The elders found out who the father was." Her voice cracked. "It wasn't who they thought I'd marry. It was someone chosen for the church. Someone whose reputation had to stay clean." Eli's mind raced. "Who?" Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Bishop Fisher's son." Eli staggered back. Samuel Fisher, a man raised to inherit spiritual authority, pure in reputation, untouchable. If the bishop's son had fathered a child out of wedlock, and with Ruth's help, the scandal would destroy them all. "What did they do to her, Anna?" Anna's face hardened. "You already know." She reached into the cradle, pulling the baby close. "They said the child was a mark of rebellion. That it would bring ruin if it stayed here. Ruth refused to let them take him. She begged them to show mercy. She said she'd raise him herself if they would just spare his life." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That was the last time I saw her." Eli left before dawn, his chest hollow. The wind was rising, bending the corn into dark waves. As he rode home, the bell from the meeting house rang once, a single, mournful tone. Someone was summoning the elders. By the time he arrived, the men were already gathered. The bishop stood before them, his black coat dusted with ash. "We have been tested," he said gravely. "A sin was born among us, and the Lord has taken his servant Ruth as payment." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "You mean, she's dead?" someone asked. "She is with God," the bishop replied. "And we must never speak her name again." Eli's fists tightened. He wanted to shout the truth, but he saw the looks, eyes warning him to stay silent, to obey. The Ordnung demanded unity. Defiance meant exile. That evening, he returned to Ruth's house. He lit a single candle, staring at the journal she'd left behind. The last entry was dated May 14, 1991, the same day carved into the table. "I have delivered many children into this world, but tonight I fear I will deliver something else, judgment. If I do not return, let it be known that mercy was my only sin." Beneath the writing was a smear of blood, as if her hand had slipped mid-sentence. 2 days later, Eli received an anonymous note under his door. It was written in the rough script of someone not used to English. "Go to the old quarry before the rain. She is waiting." He went. The quarry was a deep wound in the earth, long abandoned and half-flooded. The air was heavy with the smell of moss and stone. Near the edge, something white fluttered, a scrap of cloth caught on a branch. When he lifted it, he recognized the delicate stitching, the same thread Ruth used for the linens she carried to every birth. Beside it lay a small wooden rattle, hand-carved, the initials RS burned into the handle. And beneath that, buried shallow in the mud, was something worse, a piece of plain black cloth, stiff with dried blood. The kind worn only by men of the ministry. That night, thunder rolled over Lancaster. Eli returned to his house soaked and shaking. He knew what he'd found, proof that the bishop, or someone close to him, had been there the night Ruth vanished. He placed the blood-stained cloth beside her journal, lit the lamp, and whispered, "I'll find you, Ruth. Even if it costs me everything." Outside, the storm tore through the valley, ripping shingles from roofs and flooding the riverbank where Ruth's bonnet had once been found. When morning came, the river had changed its course. And in the mud beneath the maple tree, the one that marked the spot where the elders buried her bonnet, something new had surfaced, a tiny bone, white as porcelain, no larger than a sparrow's wing. Chapter 4, The Bone Beneath the Maple Tree. The bone was found by a child. A small boy gathering kindling near the maple that morning saw something pale glinting in the mud and thought it was a shell. He took it home in his pocket. When his mother washed his trousers that night, it fell to the floor with a hollow clink. The woman screamed. By dawn, half the community had gathered outside her house. The bishop came last, carrying his Bible like a weapon. He looked at the object in silence, his lips pressed thin. Then he turned to the crowd. "This is not for children to find," he said coldly. "It is a test." He wrapped the bone in a handkerchief and ordered the family to stay silent. But the rumor spread faster than fire. Within hours, everyone was whispering the same thing, that Ruth's remains had begun to rise from the earth. Eli heard the story from a boy at the mill. He dropped everything and ran to the site. The maple stood blackened from lightning, its roots half exposed by the storm. He dug with his bare hands, ignoring the rain that returned in sheets. After a few inches, his fingers brushed against wood. He cleared the mud until a small wooden box emerged, roughly carved, sealed with pitch. He pried it open. Inside lay not bones, but cloth. Layers of it, folded and pressed into the shape of a body. When he lifted the top layer, a smell of herbs and decay filled the air. At the bottom, wrapped in muslin, he found something heavy, a metal cross, tarnished green, the initials SF engraved on the back. Samuel Fisher. He carried the cross home and locked the door. It was undeniable now, the bishop's son had been involved in Ruth's final night. But proof alone meant nothing in a world that rejected worldly justice. The elder's word was law. Eli went to the bishop that evening anyway. He waited outside his house, the cross hidden in his pocket, while inside the family finished supper. When the door opened, Samuel himself stepped out into the cold. Their eyes met. "Working late?" Samuel asked, his tone careful, polite. "I was at the maple," Eli replied. "Found something that belongs to you." Samuel froze. You shouldn't go digging in graves that aren't yours. Neither should you, Eli said quietly, pulling the cross from his pocket. You left this behind. Samuel's eyes darkened. You don't understand what happened. Then explain. Samuel hesitated, glancing back toward the house. Ruth wanted to take the child away. She said the ordinum couldn't dictate God's mercy. My father found out. He came to speak with her. He swallowed. I tried to stop him, but things went wrong. Wrong how? Samuel's voice broke. He said she was tempting me. That the devil spoke through her. He tried to take the child, she wouldn't let go. He struck her. She fell. Eli's stomach twisted. You killed her? No, Samuel whispered. He did. But he told me that if I spoke, he would excommunicate Anna, send the child to strangers, destroy every name connected to this sin. Eli stepped closer. And you obeyed. Samuel didn't answer. That night, Eli wrote everything down, every word, every detail. He placed the paper inside Ruth's Bible and hid it beneath the floorboards. He knew he would need it soon. Because at dawn, the bells rang again. The bishop had called a meeting at the meeting house, summoning every family in the district. When Eli arrived, men were already gathered in tight clusters. The bishop stood at the front, his face pale. Brothers, he began, evil has entered this place. Someone among us digs in the soil where the Lord has forbidden. They stir the bones of the dead and bring shame to our community. He paused. This man has also spoken falsehoods against the ministry, accusing God's servants of murder. And then he said it, Eli Yoder. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Eli rose slowly. You can accuse me of blasphemy, Bishop Fisher, but I have proof of what you've done. The bishop's voice thundered. You have only lies and pride. I have your son's cross, Eli said, holding it high. And I have his confession. The room erupted, shouts, prayers, sobs. The bishop struck the pulpit. Enough. You are no longer one of us. From this day forth, you are made shunned by the faithful, cut off from God's grace. Two men grabbed Eli by the arms, dragging him outside. The crowd turned away as he was thrown into the mud. The bishop's voice followed him through the rain. Leave this place before the sun sets, or the Lord's judgment will fall on you too. He walked for miles before stopping. Night fell, cold and merciless. He found shelter in an abandoned barn near the edge of town, one of Ruth's old birthing places. Inside, he lit a lantern and stared at the items laid out before him, Ruth's journal, the cross, and the bone wrapped in linen. He whispered her name like a prayer. Ruth, tell me what to do. The flame flickered, then steadied. And for a moment, he thought he heard something, a soft creak, a faint lullaby, drifting from the rafters. He climbed the ladder slowly. In the loft, beneath a mound of hay, he found an old wooden chest. He opened it, and froze. Inside were women's clothes, folded neatly. A white bonnet. A blue ribbon. And beneath them, a small quilt wrapped around something heavy. He unwrapped it carefully. It was the baby's rattle, the same one from the quarry, but now stained dark at the edges, as if someone had tried to wash away blood. And tucked beside it, pressed flat between the folds, was a fragment of parchment, part of a baptism record, torn in half. It read, Born May 14, 1991, Samuel Ruth. A child with both their names. Eli sank to his knees. The truth finally took shape. Ruth hadn't only delivered the baby, she had baptized him, claimed him under both names, refusing to let the church erase the father's guilt or the mother's shame. That act alone had sealed her fate. He looked again at the rattle, at the small carved letters. For the first time, he noticed something else, faint marks on the handle, freshly cut, as if by a nervous hand. He held it close to the light. There, almost invisible, was a message carved in Ruth's trembling script. He lives. Eli's breath caught. If Ruth had hidden the baby, if she'd managed to send him away before the bishop came, then there was still a chance. And for the first time in months, he felt something that had long been buried beneath grief and fear. Hope. Chapter 5, The Child Who Lived. The next morning broke gray and soundless. A mist lay over the valley like a burial shroud, muffling the sound of distant bells. Eli left before dawn, carrying only Ruth's journal, the baptism fragment, and the rattle wrapped in cloth. He had one destination in mind, the town of Strasbourg, 15 miles east, far enough that the Amish seldom ventured there, yet close enough for news to travel back like smoke. Ruth had written that name once in her journal, in the margin of a recipe. The woman in Strasbourg still keeps her word. Eli didn't know who she meant, but he hoped the answer waited there. He rode through the morning rain until the fields gave way to roads lined with telephone poles, alien, humming things that always made him uneasy. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, his horse was limping and his clothes soaked through. He tied the animal behind a mill and walked the rest of the way, keeping his hat low. The town felt like another world, electric lights, neon signs, the sharp tang of gasoline. He hadn't seen such things in years. As he passed a diner window, he caught his own reflection and almost didn't recognize it, a shunned man, eyes hollow, clothes caked with mud, carrying a child's toy in his coat. The woman in Strasbourg turned out to be Abigail Kramer, an old nurse who once trained under Ruth before joining the English world. She lived above an apothecary shop near the railway tracks. Eli found her sweeping the steps, her silver hair pulled back with a ribbon. "You look like you've come from a ghost story," she said without fear. "I might have," he answered. "I'm looking for a child. A baby born in May of '91, by Ruth Stoltzfus." Abigail's broom froze midair. "You're months too late, Mr. Yoder." "So you do know her?" "I knew her better than anyone." She leaned against the railing. "And I told her not to go back that night." "What happened to the baby?" Abigail's eyes softened, then darkened. "She brought him here after midnight. Wrapped in quilts, half-starved. She was trembling, said the elders were coming for her. I tried to hide them, but she refused. Said the child had to grow outside our world. She left before sunrise." "Left him? Where?" Abigail pointed east. "At the train station. There was a couple, a Mennonite family headed to Ohio. They'd lost a child the month before. She begged them to take him." Eli's throat tightened. "Did they agree?" "Yes. But she made them promise something strange, that the boy would keep the name Samuel Ruth. Said he would understand one day." Eli sat in silence. The image of Ruth at the station haunted him, her small frame, the wind tugging at her bonnet as she handed away the life she had fought to protect. "Did she ever return?" he asked. Abigail shook her head. 3 nights later, her body washed up by the river. The papers called it a drowning, but she trailed off. Ruth wasn't the type to fall. "She didn't fall," Eli whispered. "They made sure she wouldn't talk." Abigail's gaze met his. "Then you'd best be careful who you tell that to. The Fisher name reaches far, even beyond Lancaster." He nodded. "Do you know the family who took the child?" Abigail thought for a long time. "Their name was Weaver. From Holmes County, Ohio. The husband was Daniel, the wife Clara. They left on the morning freight. I never saw them again." That night, Eli stayed in the barn behind the apothecary. Rain beat against the roof like drums. He read through Ruth's journal by lanternlight, searching for anything he'd missed. Between pages of scripture and notes on herbs, he found a scrap tucked inside the binding, a letter never sent. To whoever finds him, he bears the truth. Do not raise him in fear, but teach him that mercy and rebellion can be the same thing. Tell him I forgave them all. At the bottom, her signature, Ruth Stoltzfus, and a single tear stain darkened the paper. Eli closed his eyes. "I'll find him," he murmured. "Even if I have to cross the world." By morning, word had already reached Lancaster. Someone had seen him at the train yard. By afternoon, 2 men rode out to Strasbourg, plain-clothed, but with the posture of elders. When Eli went to buy feed for his horse, he saw them waiting at the end of the street. He slipped into the alleys, heart pounding. They followed. He could hear their boots behind him, steady, patient, like a prayer being recited. He ducked into the apothecary, where Abigail stood behind the counter. "They're here," he said. She didn't ask who. She pointed to a door behind the shelves. "Go through there. It leads to the old coal tunnel. Hurry." Eli hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled faintly. "Because Ruth once saved my life too." He crawled through the narrow tunnel, the lantern shaking in his hand. The air smelled of rust and damp stone. When he finally emerged outside town, the sun was sinking, blood red against the clouds. He followed the railroad tracks north until his legs gave out. That night, he camped by the tracks, staring at the distant lights of passing trains, each one a moving heartbeat of the world Ruth had trusted to keep her secret alive. Somewhere in Ohio, a boy named Samuel Ruth Weaver was growing up, perhaps learning to walk, to speak, to ask who he was. Eli pressed the rattle against his chest. "I'll bring him home," he whispered. But not to them. To her. 2 weeks later, an unsigned notice appeared nailed to the meeting house door in Lancaster. "A sin buried in the river has risen. The truth travels west." The bishop tore it down before sunrise. But the men who read it before he arrived would never forget the handwriting, thin, careful, unmistakably familiar. Ruth's. That night, the Fisher barn caught fire. It burned so hot that the roof collapsed in minutes. The bishop's son escaped, but the bishop himself was never seen again. When the ashes cooled, they found something blackened and twisted near the altar, a metal cross, half melted, initials still visible, SF. No one spoke of it publicly, but within the Amish of Lancaster, whispers spread again, of a curse that moved like a shadow, of a woman's spirit keeping watch by the river, and of a child somewhere far away who carried her name and her defiance in his blood. Eli left Pennsylvania the next morning. As the sun rose behind him, he passed the boundary sign of the district, "You are leaving Lancaster County." He didn't look back. In his pocket, the rattle glowed faintly in the light, as if polished by invisible hands. And somewhere across the horizon, a boy stirred in his cradle, awoken by a dream he would never remember, of a woman with gentle hands whispering, "He lives." Chapter 6, The Legacy of Mercy. The road to Ohio stretched endless and gray. Autumn had begun to touch the trees, and the air carried the sharp scent of rain and wood smoke. Eli followed the railway most of the way, sleeping in barns, trading carpentry work for bread. Every mile pulled him farther from the community that had raised him, and closer to the secret Ruth had died to protect. He reached Holmes County 3 weeks later. It was another Amish settlement, quieter, newer, untouched by Lancaster's shadow. But even here, the Ordnung ruled hearts more than any sheriff. Strangers weren't welcome. A shunned man, even less. Eli hid his shunning beard beneath a scarf and asked around the marketplace for a Weaver family, Mennonites, not Amish, living near the edge of town. Most looked away, unwilling to talk. Only an old wagon repairman gave a hint. "You mean Daniel and Clara Weaver? They left years ago. Folks said their boy was different. Heard they moved north, near Millersburg." Different. That word sat heavy in Eli's mind. The Weavers' farmhouse sat at the edge of a hill overlooking a cornfield already harvested. When Eli arrived, smoke curled gently from the chimney. A woman, older, kind-eyed, stood by the porch hanging laundry. Her hair was streaked with gray, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Eli approached slowly, hat in hand. "Mrs. Weaver?" She turned, startled but not afraid. "Yes? My name is Eli Yoder. I'm looking for a boy you took in about 11 years ago." His name was Samuel Ruth. At the sound of the name, her hands froze. A sheet slipped from the line. "You should leave," she said softly. "Please." "I knew his mother." Her eyes widened. "Then you know she's gone." Eli nodded. "I also know why." The wind caught the sheet between them, snapping it like a warning. Finally, Clara whispered, "He's not here." "Where is he?" She hesitated, then gestured toward the barn. "Working the fields with Daniel. But before you speak to him, you should understand. He's not like other children." Samuel Ruth Weaver was tall for his age, with dark hair and calm, watchful eyes. When he looked at Eli, something in his expression made the older man's breath falter. There was recognition there, not memory, but instinct. "You came from Lancaster," the boy said. His voice was quiet, certain. Eli nodded. "How did you know?" The boy shrugged. "Sometimes I dream of it. The river, the houses. A woman singing." Eli's hands trembled. "Do you remember her face?" The boy frowned, thinking. "She had kind eyes. But she always looks sad when I see her." "That was your mother, Ruth." The boy's gaze dropped to the soil. "Father says she died a long time ago." "She did. But not the way they told you." Eli hesitated, then pulled the rattle from his coat. "This was yours." The boy reached out carefully, tracing the carved letters, Samuel Ruth. When his thumb brushed the faint etching, he whispered, "He lives." Eli's heart stopped. "Who taught you that phrase?" "No one," the boy said. "It just comes when I hold this." Clara appeared behind them, her face pale. "He hears her, Mr. Yoder. Sometimes at night he talks in his sleep, says her name. The lights flicker when he does." Eli looked at the rattle again. The wood felt warmer now, pulsing faintly. A mother's faith, he thought, doesn't die, it lingers. Later that night, after supper, Eli sat with the Weavers by lamplight. Daniel, a quiet man with steady hands, finally spoke. "When Ruth came to us, she was bleeding," he said. "She refused to rest until we promised to take the child. She said the people who hunted her would stop at nothing. She begged us to raise him as our own, never to tell him the truth." "Why did you agree?" Eli asked. Daniel's gaze met his. "Because she saved Clara's life once, years before. During a birth gone wrong. We owed her more than she knew." Clara wiped her eyes. "But Samuel, he's not ordinary. Animals follow him. The sick recover after he prays. Once, he touched a dying calf and it stood up. We think," she hesitated, "we think she left him with something holy." Eli stayed the night in the guest room, listening to the creak of the farmhouse and the rhythm of rain against the glass. Sometime past midnight, he woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The door opened slightly, and Samuel stood there holding the rattle. "Mr. Yoder," the boy whispered. "She's here." Eli sat up. "Who?" "The woman from my dreams." Before Eli could speak, the lantern flickered. A faint scent of lavender filled the air, the same that clung to Ruth's house back in Lancaster. Then came a whisper, soft as breath. "Mercy and rebellion are the same thing." Eli's chest tightened. "Ruth?" The boy looked up, tears bright in his eyes. "She says she forgives them." And then, just as suddenly, the light steadied. The room was still again. At dawn, Eli walked to the field behind the barn. The mist clung low to the grass, and dew glittered like tiny shards of glass. He stood there a long time, the rattle in his hand, until he noticed a shape carved into the soil, 3 simple letters formed by the plow lines where Samuel had worked the day before, RSH. Ruth Stoltzfus Healer. He smiled faintly. Even in exile, even in silence, her name had survived. When he said goodbye, Clara pressed a parcel into his hands, bread, dried apples, a letter sealed with wax. "It's from the boy," she said. "He wrote it this morning." Eli opened it once he reached the crossroads. Inside, in Samuel's careful handwriting, were just 6 words. "Tell them she did not sin." He folded the letter and looked west, toward the endless miles of open country. Somewhere behind him, a woman's voice seemed to echo faintly through the wind, singing an old hymn Ruth loved to hum while tending her herbs. He whispered it with her. "For nothing hidden shall stay buried." And when the last verse faded, he finally understood what Ruth had done, not just saved a life, but broken a cycle. Her mercy had rewritten their law. Her defiance had become faith. Eli never returned to Lancaster. Some say he built a small chapel by the river, where no bishop ever preached, and where every traveler, shunned or saved, could light a candle for the woman who vanished after a forbidden birth. Others said he disappeared like she had, his lantern seen some nights near the maple grove where the earth first gave up its secret. But the legend endured. Among both Amish and Mennonite, people still whispered that when storms rose over the valley, and the wind carried the scent of lavender, it meant Ruth Stoltzfus was passing through, checking on the living, and on the one child who still carried her name. Because mercy, once born, never dies. Epilogue: The river remembers. 30 years later, the river had changed its course again. It no longer curved gently past the maple grove but cut straight through the valley like a scar, flooding the fields where the Stoltzfus farm once stood. The old meeting house was gone, replaced by a weathered bridge and the faint hum of electric lines. Only the stones remained, and, on certain mornings, the smell of lavender that rose when the mist settled low. A man walked along the bank, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark coat damp from the drizzle. A quiet strength clung to him, the kind of calm born from long years of carrying silence. He stopped beside a wooden cross, simple and unmarked. Its wood was nearly black with age, but at the base, someone had recently placed a small bundle of dried herbs and a single white bonnet. The man knelt. He took a small rattle from his coat, the same one carved with faint letters long ago, Samuel Ruth. Time had worn the edges smooth, but when he held it, warmth still pulsed through the wood. "Mother," he whispered. The word trembled in the air, carried by wind and memory. Samuel Ruth Weaver had grown into a man caught between two worlds, neither fully Amish nor wholly of the English. He had become a healer, traveling from farm to farm, refusing payment beyond what people could give. Some called him the quiet doctor, others whispered that his prayers cured fevers when medicine failed. He never denied it. He only said that mercy came from the same hands that rebellion once did. On his 40th year, a letter arrived by post. It bore no name, only a Lancaster return address and the faint trace of lavender on the paper. Inside were a few words written in a trembling hand. "The tree still stands. The truth still waits." The handwriting was unmistakable, old-fashioned, curved like a woman's stitching. He knew immediately where to go. Now, standing by the river, Samuel brushed away leaves from the base of the cross. Beneath them, half buried, was a small metal plaque, tarnished but legible. Someone had etched it there years after the flood. "Ruth Stoltzfus, midwife, mother, forgiven." He traced the words with his fingers, tears gathering behind his eyes. "I never knew you," he said softly, "but you've been with me every day." The wind rose, carrying the scent of wet earth and herbs. And then, faint, almost imperceptible, came a whisper, like the rustle of fabric. "He lives." Samuel closed his eyes. The same warmth that had filled him as a child, the strange peace that came when he prayed, settled over him now. It wasn't a ghost, he realized, but a presence. A love so deep it refused to die. He placed the rattle on the plaque. "Your mercy changed everything," he said. "Even the ones who damned you, their children speak kinder now." The ordnung broke, and from it grew something gentler. From behind him, the sound of footsteps in the mud. A young woman approached, her bonnet untied, rain dripping from its brim. She carried a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. "Are you Samuel Weaver?" she asked. He nodded. "They told me you could bless him," she said, her voice trembling. "He wasn't supposed to survive. But I heard about your mother, the one who helped women when no one else would." Samuel smiled faintly. "She still does." He placed his hand on the child's tiny chest and whispered the same verse Ruth had once marked in her Bible. "For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid, that shall not be known." The baby stirred, then breathed deeply, his small hand curling around Samuel's finger. Outside, the rain stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting the river until it shone like molten glass. The woman looked at him in awe. "What did you just do?" "Nothing," he said. "It wasn't me." When she left, Samuel remained by the water. The river ran brighter now, clearer. He thought of Eli Yoder, the man who had given him back his name, and of the countless souls who'd carried Ruth's story quietly through the years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old baptism fragment, brittle, yellowed, but still intact. He read the words once more, "Born May 14, 1991, Samuel Ruth." Then he tore it gently in half and released it into the current. The paper drifted away, turning slowly before sinking beneath the surface. The circle was closed. The river would remember. That night, travelers passing along the bridge swore they saw a lantern glowing beneath the maple grove, though no one had been buried there for decades. Some said it was Eli, keeping vigil. Others said it was Ruth herself, watching over the living. But those who knew the story best said it was something simpler, the light of mercy, refusing to go out. Because mercy, once born, never dies.